Mark van Bommel has taken over Belgium, and he is already making it clear that the golden generation's time is up. Kevin De Bruyne, Romelu Lukaku, and Thibaut Courtois could all be pushed aside as he rebuilds the squad. But one of his first decisions has left Belgian football shocked. Let me catch you up. Let's start with what's confirmed. Mark van Bommel, the former Netherlands international and one of European football's more decorated midfielders of his generation, has been appointed Belgium's national team manager on a deal running until June 2028. That's not a short trial, that's a 4-year runway, taking him straight through to the next Euros. The move happened fast. The appointment follows the departure of Rudi Garcia, who left the role around July 20, 2026, with reports of an agreement between Van Bommel and the Belgian Football Association surfacing the following day. Fabrizio Romano broke it on social media, writing that the deal was in place until June 2028 and that Van Bommel was ready to replace Garcia. Belgian outlets confirmed it almost in real time. Here's the part that matters for the golden generation conversation. Belgium will hope Van Bommel can guide the Red Devils into a new era as they begin preparations for UEFA Euro 2028 qualification and continue rebuilding the national team. Rebuilding, that word is doing a lot of work. It's not maintaining, it's not managing a golden generation's twilight tour. It's rebuilding, and rebuilding means somebody's playing time goes down. Van Bommel isn't walking into a team that just won something. Belgium's 2026 FIFA World Cup campaign ended in the quarterfinals, with the Red Devils showing flashes of quality before eventually falling short against Spain. That quarterfinal exit was the last stand for the players who defined Belgian football for a decade. Courtois and De Bruyne were both seen in tears on the pitch after that Spain game, the moment widely read as the golden generation's final act together. Now think about who's actually in that squad. Courtois, the goalkeeper who's carried the Belgian net since his early 20s. Lukaku, Belgium's record scorer with 89 international goals. De Bruyne, the creative engine who's run Belgium's attack for over 10 years. All three were part of the group Garcia took to the World Cup. All three are now the players Van Bommel has to make a call on. And the noises coming out of Belgian football before Van Bommel's appointment already pointed this way. Reports framed his arrival as overseeing the next phase of the national team's rebuilding process, as preparations begin for the UEFA Euro 2028 qualification campaign. Not a continuation, a next phase. That's the language of a federation that already knows the current core can't be the foundation for 2028. So here's the situation Van Bommel steps into. A team that just lost in the last 8 of a World Cup. A dressing room built around 3 players in their 30s, who are running out of road on the international stage. A federation that hired him specifically to start something new rather than patch up something old. And a 4-year contract that gives him the time to actually do it, rather than being judged after one bad set of qualifiers. This is where we get into how it actually plays out, starting with the man they got the job, and why the Belgian Federation decided he was the one to swing the axe on the golden generation. To understand what Van Bommel is about to do to Courtois, Lukaku, and De Bruyne, you need to understand what he's done before. This isn't his first rebuild, it's basically his signature move. Start with the resume. As a player, Van Bommel logged over 500 club appearances and earned more than 40 caps for the Netherlands, representing a career that took him through PSV Eindhoven, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, and AC Milan, among others. He was a serial winner as a player, trophies at basically every stop. That matters because it gives him a certain authority in a dressing room. Players who won plenty themselves tend not to be intimidated by a locker room full of famous faces. But it's the coaching career that Belgium actually bought. On the coaching side, his most notable work came at Royal Antwerp, where he delivered a league and cup double in the 2022-23 season. That wasn't a fluke season with a stacked squad. Antwerp isn't one of Europe's giants. Van Bommel took a club that hadn't won the Belgian title in decades and turned it into a double winner within roughly a year of arriving. What he did at Antwerp is the blueprint for what Belgium is hoping for now. Antwerp was unbeaten in all of its competitive matches since the Dutchman took over, sitting at the top of the Belgian First Division A with 4 wins from its first 4 matches in that early stretch. He built identity fast, and crucially, he did it while leaning on a mix of proven experience and players nobody outside Belgium had heard of yet. That's the pattern the Belgian Federation is banking on. When Milan reportedly considered him as a candidate, the reporting around that flirtation is telling. Outlets described the profile Milan wanted at the time as coaches more inclined, for example, to work with young players. And Van Bommel's name got dropped into exactly that conversation. One fan comment even went further, framing him as a coach who'd actually use the club's young players, which we have in abundance either in the Primavera or out on loan, added to the still young players we have in the squad right now. So even outside Belgium, his coaching identity had already calcified into the guy who turns academy prospects and squad players into a functioning unit, rather than the guy who manages superstars. That's not a neutral hire for a federation staring down 3 aging icons. That's a federation picking the coach whose entire body of work says he'll make the hard call on veterans if he thinks the team's better for it. His first crack at international management is this job. Van Bommel will be taking charge of a national team for the first time in his coaching career, having previously established himself at club level. No prior national team gig to point to as precedent, but that's almost the point. Belgium didn't hire a caretaker, they hired a club-level builder and handed him a country. And the timeline backs up how much the federation wanted him specifically, rather than settling. Belgium identified Van Bommel as its preferred candidate soon after Garcia's departure, and negotiations progressed quickly before both parties reached an agreement. There was another name floated in the same window. Sergio Conceição was reported as a candidate too, but Belgium moved fast toward Van Bommel specifically. Financial terms have been settled, while discussions over his coaching staff have also been concluded, meaning this wasn't a rushed emergency appointment. It was a deliberate, fully worked-out plan, staff and all, built around one man's track record of tearing down and rebuilding. Now compare that to the man he's replacing. Garcia wasn't a failure by the numbers. Garcia achieved amazing records with the Belgian national team, with 12 impressive wins, 6 draws, and only 2 defeats from his 20 matches after becoming the coach of the Red Devils. But he still built his squad around the same senior trio that had carried Belgium for a decade. The quarterfinal exit against Spain was proof that the ceiling with that approach had been reached. The federation wasn't punishing bad results, they were ending an era on schedule, right after the golden generation's last realistic shot at silverware disappeared. That's the man walking into the Belgium camp now, a serial winner as a player, a proven club-level rebuilder. Hired specifically because his history says he won't blink at benching legends if the project calls for it. Next up, who exactly he's inheriting and just how old and battle-worn that golden generation actually is walking into this new era. Here's the group Van Bommel now has to manage. And the injury reports and squad lists tell their own story before he's even picked a starting 11. Start with the headline trio. Courtois, De Bruyne, and Lukaku are all either 33 or 34. And based on their respective campaigns at club level this season, it looks unlikely that their national team careers will be extended for much longer. That's not outside pundit speculation, that's the shape of their season stats talking. Take Courtois first. Courtois still played 51 games for Real Madrid in all competitions in 2025-26, but he missed his club's most important matches of the season after coming off injured at halftime in the Champions League's last 16. 51 appearances sounds like a goalkeeper in career-best form. The injury at the business end of the biggest competition in club football tells a different story, one where his body isn't holding up when it matters most anymore. Then there's Lukaku, and his season was worse. Lukaku only played 64 minutes for Napoli in 2025-26. Due to injuries and multiple misunderstandings with manager Antonio Conte and club president Aurelio De Laurentiis, after having been a key member of the Partenopei's Scudetto-winning side a year earlier. 64 minutes, that's not a rotation player having a quiet year. That's a player who's basically been frozen out of his own club, a year removed from winning the league with them. Belgium's all-time top scorer showed up to the World Cup on the back of almost no football at all. And De Bruyne, the one whose body has held up best of the three, but whose career window is closing all the same on the calendar alone. He's spent the tail end of his career away from Manchester City, chasing minutes at Napoli, still delivering when fit but doing it on borrowed time by any striker or midfielder's standard. It's not just the headline three either. Witsel played 32 matches in La Liga this season, as part of the Girona side, who were relegated to the Segunda División. A relegation season at a club level for one of the last remaining names from Belgium's 2014 breakthrough crop. That's the wider picture around the golden generation right now, not one or two players slowing down, but almost the entire senior spine of the team. Either injured, sidelined by club politics, or playing out a bad season somewhere in Europe. And it's not just this website reading it that way. Multiple outlets independently landed on the same read after the Spain game. It seems highly unlikely that 4 of Belgium's legends in Courtois, De Bruyne, Romelu Lukaku and Axel Witsel will return for the next World Cup in 2030. With Thibaut Courtois and Kevin De Bruyne both in tears after Belgium's loss to Spain in the FIFA World Cup quarterfinals. Tears on the pitch from 2 of the most decorated players the country has ever had. Because everyone in that stadium understood what that scoreline meant for their international careers. Widen the lens further and you get the full sweep of who's already gone or fading before Van Bommel even took the job. The likes of Eden Hazard, Leandro Trossard, Brandon Mitchell, Timothy Castagny, Hans Vanaken and Thomas Munier have all likely played their last World Cup minutes as well. Hazard's already retired from the international game entirely, walking away years ago with a message that the next generation was ready to take over. Kompany did the same. The spine of the group that beat Brazil in 2018 has been dismantled one retirement at a time. And what's left standing right now is exactly the trio, Courtois, Lukaku, De Bruyne, that Van Bommel has to make a decision on immediately. This is where the job gets its edge. A new coach with a track record for building teams around club-level squads full of prospects. Arriving at the exact moment the last 3 superstar names from a golden era are all, by their own club form, running on fumes. Garcia had already started leaning that direction himself, bringing in younger players such as Joaquin Sayes, Nathan Ngoy and 21-year-old Macias Fernandez Pardo, who earns his first call-up, even while still building his Zai around the senior trio. Van Bommel isn't starting that transition from zero. He's inheriting a squad that was already halfway turned over, with the last 3 big names standing between the current group and a full changing of the guard. The stage is set for exactly the kind of call Van Bommel's whole career has trained him to make. Next, what actually happens once he starts picking teams, and what it looks like when a coach decides the golden generation's clock has finally run out. So what does kicking out the golden generation look like in practice? Once a new coach with Van Bommel's history takes charge of a squad in exactly this position. Belgium's own recent history gives a clear preview, because this isn't the first time a Belgium coach has had to make this exact call on this exact trio. Rewind to the manager before Garcia. When Domenico Tedesco took over Belgium in the aftermath of the last golden generation disappointment, he did precisely what Van Bommel now looks primed to do. Head coach Domenico Tedesco said Courtois would not be selected, saying he was focusing on players who are in good shape, and adding, "I don't want a tit-for-tat situation." That's a coach openly telling the country's best goalkeeper he's not needed. The exact dynamic now sitting on Van Bommel's desk with 3 names instead of 1. Courtois' response at the time makes the stakes obvious. The situation escalated to the point that Tedesco claimed Courtois had refused to travel with the squad after he was overlooked for the captaincy, a snubbed goalkeeper skipping the national team entirely over a leadership decision. That's how combustible this exact dynamic gets when a coach decides a senior legend isn't automatic anymore. And it's precisely the kind of standoff Van Bommel now has the power to trigger again, on a bigger scale with 3 players instead of 1. Lukaku's treatment under that same rebuilding push tells the same story from a different angle. Kevin De Bruyne was included in Belgium's squad for Nations League matches, but Romelu Lukaku was omitted after asking for time off to concentrate on getting fit. After his move to Napoli, coach Domenico Tedesco announced, even the record goalscorer wasn't untouchable. Once a coach decided the team needed to move past reliance on one player's fitness struggles. And De Bruyne, even De Bruyne, the most protected of the 3, wasn't given a free pass either. Tedesco, while omitting several regulars to open the way for younger players, said De Bruyne was essential to his plans to bring on a younger generation. Notice the phrasing there. Even the manager keeping De Bruyne in the squad was doing it inside a project explicitly built around a younger generation. De Bruyne surviving the cut wasn't proof the golden generation was safe. It was proof that even the coaches trying to move on from it still needed his individual output, while dismantling everything around him. That's the exact playbook now sitting in front of Van Bommel, except with less patience left in the tank. Where Tedesco was managing players in their early 30s who still had entire prime years of international football in front of them, Van Bommel is managing the same 3 names several years further down the road, coming off a World Cup exit, and in Lukaku's case, off a season that amounted to barely more than an hour of first-team football. Look again at what those individual campaigns mean once you put a rebuilding coach in the dugout. A goalkeeper who breaks down at the exact moment his club needs him. a striker frozen out of his own club dressing room for most of a season. A creator who, by his own admission going back years, has openly called a version of this squad too old. Each of those data points isn't neutral information for Van Bommel, it's a green light. A coach hired specifically to rebuild doesn't need much cover to start reducing minutes for players whose club form is already doing the talking against them. And it's not just 3 individuals fading. It's the surrounding cast thinning out at the same time, which makes the decision easier rather than harder. With Witzel's season ending in a relegation, and names like Munier and Van Aken already flagged as having played their final World Cup minutes, Van Bommel doesn't have to dismantle a fortress. He's walking into a structure that was already crumbling at the edges, where the only load-bearing walls left standing are Courtois, Lukaku, and De Bruyne. Take those 3 out or even meaningfully reduce their role, and there's genuinely very little of the old golden generation left in the squad photo at all. That's what makes this appointment land so differently from a normal managerial change. It's not a new coach inheriting a settled, informed group and deciding whether to tinker at the edges. It's a rebuild specialist inheriting a group that's already visibly breaking down, with the 3 biggest names in the country's football history standing as the very last obstacle between the current squad and a full changeover. Every incentive, his own history, the federation's stated goals, the players' own club seasons, points the same direction. Which brings us to what actually happens next, now that the appointment is signed and the rebuilding clock has officially started. So where does this actually land? Van Bommel now has the contract, the mandate, and a squad that's already handed him the reasons to move on from its most decorated names. The runway is long. Mark Van Bommel is appointed Belgium head coach until June 2028, tasked with leading the Red Devils through the 2026 FIFA World Cup cycle. That length of deal tells you the federation isn't expecting instant results, they're expecting a project. 4 years to build toward Euro 2028 with whoever he decides deserves to be there. The framing from the federation's own side has been consistent from the moment his name got linked to the job. Belgium will be hoping Van Bommel can steer the Red Devils into a new era, as they begin preparations for UEFA Euro 2028 qualification, and continue the process of rebuilding the national team. A new era, not a continuation of the old one with fresh paint. An actual new era with new faces at the center of it. There's a version of this story where Courtois, Lukaku, and De Bruyne get one last cycle of caps, before bowing out gracefully, the way Hazard did years earlier, with a message about the next generation being ready. There's another version where Van Bommel does what Tedesco once did to Courtois, tells one or all 3 they're simply not needed anymore, and lets the standoff play out in public the way it did before. Given his history at Antwerp, given the federation's own language about rebuilding, and given just how battered the trio's club seasons already were heading into this appointment, the second version looks far more likely than the first. What's certain is this: the golden generation's clock has been ticking down in public for years now. Through retirements, through injury reports, through a striker limited to barely an hour of club football in an entire season. Van Bommel didn't create that decline. He's simply the first coach with both the mandate and the track record to act on it without hesitation. Belgium hired a rebuilder in the exact moment its most famous players ran out of road. And the 4 years starting now will decide whether Courtois, Lukaku, and De Bruyne get any kind of final say in how their international careers end, or whether that decision gets made for them. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.